So our scripture passage today is from Proverbs chapter 4, starting with verse 10. Hear, my child, and accept my words, that the years of your life be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and as you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Gird yourself, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evildoers. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of righteousness is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what they stumble over. My child, be attentive to my words. Incline your ears to my sayings. Do not let them escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech, and put delvish talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Keep straight the path of your feet, and all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your feet away from evil. So, some of you may not know this, but I have just come back from a 6 weeks stint, renewal leave, where I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is a 500-mile trek across Spain to Santiago, which is the place where it's believed to be the resting place of the bones of the Apostle James. Santiago is the Spanish name for Saint James. And so the town is named after him, St. James, Santiago. And so I just got back just over a week ago. So if you will forgive me, I might tell a few stories about my Camino trip. It was a pilgrimage for me. And I mentioned last week was really my first Sunday back, but I mentioned last week about the time that I got lost on the trail, that I didn't know where I was, and I was not on the Camino any longer. There were other times when that happened, one other time particularly, that I got lost and I was a little confused. Really quite a different story than last week. So if you'll tolerate me, I'll tell you the story. We stayed each night in what are called in Spanish albergues. They're really hostels. And so you'd walk in and you might have 50 people bunking in one room. And unfortunately, if there were that many, there were often just 2 toilets and 2 showers. But, that's a whole nother problem. So you'd have a whole lot of people sleeping in one room, and you learn to sleep with a lot of noise. You learn to sleep with a lot of movement and even light, because people would have flashlights. Everybody had a different sleeping schedule, and so you'd have some people coming in late, some people leaving at 4:30 in the morning to start walking. So I always slept with an eye mask that I got on the plane on the way over. What a wonderful gift. I had no idea that would be so important. So I slept with that, and then I slept with earplugs. Now, those that you kind of twist up and poke in your ears don't work at all. Don't do anything for the kind of noise that we had at night. So the wax kind, if you ever are in need of earplugs, the wax kind are preferred. Now I have learned something on the Camino. Yeah. So I would poke those in, put my eye mask on, and I could sleep through just about anything. And so when we came across an albergue that promised one room with 2 beds, oh my gosh, we were just thought we were in heaven. And so it was surrounded. So here's the church. It was unusual. It's the most unusual one on the Camino, they say, but it was certainly unusual. There was a church. Every town had a church. So there was the church, and the city had built a horseshoe building around the backside of the church. And it had gates that attached to the church so that it was completely closed in at night. But in that horseshoe, there were just a bunch of rooms that you could go into, and each room had 2 beds. No bunk bed, didn't have to climb up, it was 2 beds. Great. And so each door had a number, 9, 10, it was the number of the bed, 9 or 10, 11, 12, whatever. And I thought we were in heaven. It was a lovely place. We got there early. We were able to. So the regular schedule is you walk in the morning until you cannot walk anymore. I heard so many people say, "I am done," and I really knew what they meant by that. So you walk until you couldn't stand it anymore, and find a place to sleep for the night. And you go in, you take a shower, wash your clothes. So they hope they would be dry by night. Or you'd have to be fumbling to find them early in the morning. And then about time you get all that done, you're about to starve for lunch, and you go find something to eat. Well, Spain takes a siesta at 2 o'clock, and so then it'd be hard to find something to eat. So it was sometimes a difficult schedule, but by the time we went to bed, 8 and 9, maybe even 10, whatever, you were pretty wiped out. And I regularly experienced Camino brain, where I really didn't always know what I was doing. I left stuff, just wasn't thinking clearly. So this night in this albergue in one of those towns that I can't remember, I got up in the middle of the night, and the bathroom was in the very back of the horseshoe-shaped structure. Very back of it. So I got up, it was cold out, ran to the bathroom, was coming back to my room, went to my room, was getting into bed, and suddenly someone moved. I'd gone in the wrong room. Instead of 9, 10, I'd gone into 11, 12. And so I was like, oops, sorry. Left, went back and found my room. Well, I had met the woman the night before. I happened to meet my neighbors the night before, and she didn't speak any English. So I don't even know if she knew what was going on when I said, oops, wrong room. So I guess she figured it out that someone had come in the wrong room and interrupted her. The whole next day, I just laughed about it because it was Camino brain, thought it was funny, so funny. And also typical of me, because even if I had not had Camino brain, I do mix numbers up. I'm prone to doing that, so it's even if I had been thinking straight, I might have gone in the wrong room anyway. But anyway, rudely awoken was she that night. So that was one of those times when I got off the trail a little bit and went the wrong way. A little bit different story of me making some silly mistake. The Camino is, reason I can so freely use all these stories to tell you is that it's a really great metaphor for life. Tremendous metaphorical imagery from the trail. It has a gravity about it. People have been walking the Camino for more than 1,000 years, and to go to the bones of St. James. And so it has this pull to it. I met people from all over the world. I met people from South Korea, from Australia, from Mexico, of course, from America, from the U.S., from Canada, from Falkland Islands, even Germany, all the European countries, all of them, Italy, Spain. Of course, there are lots of Spaniards on the trail, but I also met met several people from the Netherlands. And one woman from the Netherlands I traveled with her for several days. So you meet people along the way. In fact, her name was Kitty. She and I were at a waterhole. We were at a fountain on the trail, and we were both stopped, and there was a crowd of people all refilling their water bottles and taking a rest off the trail. And she sat down, and I was struck by her age. Here I was in such great pain with my feet, and she just comes in and just was lively. And she sat next to me, and I said, "Hi, my name is Linda. What's your name?" "Kitty." "Where are you from?" "I'm from the Netherlands. I'm from the USA." And I usually ask some other questions at that point, but I asked her, I said, "May I ask you how old you are?" And she was like, a little offended that I would ask her, but she answered, and she said, "Well, I'm 83. Yes, walking 500 miles at the age of 83. Truly amazing. So I fell in step with her, thinking, well, if an 83-year-old can do it, surely I can walk, as well. So she and I walked together for about 4 days, all day long, and she set a good pace, and I would just follow her. She didn't talk a lot, which was perfect because I was doing my own thing. But one of the questions I liked to ask people, I asked her as well. I asked her, "So what is your reason for walking?" Now, this is the Camino. This is the Camino de Santiago. This is an ancient pilgrimage. And so I expected that to be a question that people were really comfortable answering. And I expected to hear more often than not, "Well, I'm Catholic. I'm doing this, for a miracle. I'm doing this for forgiveness of something I've done in my past life." And I did actually hear those things from people. But more often than not, I heard, "Well, it's not religious for me. I don't go to church." And then they would even say, "And I'm not even doing it for spiritual reasons." And so, in other words, the Camino has a gravity about it that people are not necessarily aware of why they are walking. Now, I do not mean to be condescending to those who would not say that they're doing it for spiritual reasons, but I live with my life trying to be open to spirituality, and it was so obvious to me that that was what people were doing. Maybe they were not using the same language or accepting that language for their purpose. For example, Kitty, I asked her, "So, why are you walking?" "Oh, I'm just walking because it's a good thing to do to walk." She had walked last year. She was doing it in sections. So last year she had walked from Burgos to Leon, just over 100 miles, and just to see if she could do it, she said, because she'd had a hip replacement, and she said, "I just wanted to see if I could do it." And so now that I know I can do it, I'll do this section this year, and next year I'll do the last section into Santiago. Well, the trail, as I said, always goes through every village it goes through. It goes by a church, or if it's a big town, it would go by a cathedral. It is a spiritual journey. It is a religious pilgrimage. So the pilgrims would go through those towns and by those churches to get their stamp on their passport to show that they went through that town. And most of the churches were open all day long and had someone there to stamp your passport to show that you came through. And so we would go. It was rare. I think I went only one day where I did not go into a church. You walk into a village, you may get something to eat, you may go to the bathroom. Your next question is, "Where I wonder where the church is." And so you'd spend a few moments in these really ancient buildings that were amazing stained glass, amazing gold leaf covering on the front altar, really stunning, beautiful things. And of course, Kitty had done those things also. She went through that same thing and went into those churches. And she said that, even though it wasn't a spiritual thing for her, she said last year when she went from Burgos to Lyon, she said, I thought that at the end of my journey, when I got back to the Netherlands, I would go into the church that I grew up in. My father was faithful churchgoer, and so I would go and visit that church that I grew up in. So she said when she went back, she did go to that church. She said, I walked in to the church, and it was so overwhelming that I cried. I just wept and cried, and I could not stay. And I had to turn around and walk out. And yet, she would say it was not a religious or spiritual journey for her. So that's why I say I don't feel like I'm being condescending to say that people were having religious and spiritual experiences, even though they didn't have the language to accept that. She had been through so many churches and been through such a hard experience, and to go back and the church that she grew up in was overwhelming for her. I stand before you as your pastor, longing that every single moment be a spiritual one. I believe that we are created with that possibility. We're created as children of God to have that at all times, not just when we walk into a church or go on some pilgrimage, but that could be every single day and every single moment. We are created that way. I believe that God made us to be spiritual beings. So I want to talk about the gravity of the Camino. So we're walking, and people are walking for all these reasons. You really feel the pull of the people that are not only walking in front of you. Kitty helped me make it those really hard days. I mean, if you cannot follow an 83-year-old, who can you follow? And so every step she made, I was like, okay, I can make that step. I can make that step. And so she had kind of a pull for me. And the whole trail has that feel because, you'll have 100 people pass you during the day. And, if they can make it, you can make it. And more importantly, it's the millions of people that have walked before you. There are sections of the trail that, instead of it being flat with the rest of the terrain, is absolutely worn down from the millions of people that have walked it. And so if they can walk it in conditions that were so much worse in the past, then of course I can also. It has that kind of attachment where you feel the gravity of the people that have gone before you. That was a real eye-opener to me, to know that a path made by people of faith can have that kind of pull and have that kind of draw on the whole world that comes to walk the Camino de Santiago. So I want to live as a spiritual person, aware of the spiritual nature of each and every moment. What I also mean by that is that I want to live aware that our church has a sense of gravity. Whether we are aware of it or not, it is making a difference in our lives and in the lives of Medford, Oregon. Now, it's quite obvious on the Camino how it's really making an impact. Every one of those villages on the Camino are benefiting from all the travelers. You can really kind of put even a number, financial number mark on how that path makes a difference in people's lives. But here in Medford, I want to live spiritually aware of how we're making a difference. We have a sense of gravity, not only in our lives with the people that we are touching, but this community in the lives that we are touching here in Medford. So I read a passage today from Proverbs, and I'll tell you why I picked it. I picked it because it talked about a path. And I wake up every day. I still wake up thinking I'm in Spain, even though it's just been over a week. So I wake up, before I open my eyes, I'm like, okay, now what city am I in? What village am I in? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm back at home. So I still am kind of Spain-oriented. But the trail, the most amazing thing, one of the things about the Camino is that even though we went through amazing landscape, the thing I looked at the most was the trail. The trail right in front of me. When I go hiking here in Oregon, I am looking at wildflowers, I am looking at the great scenery, I'm looking at the great vistas that I'm walking through. The Camino is made of so many rocks. And I met so many people that were not looking at the path, and they fell and had a cut and stitches, or fell and broke their arm. We just had, it didn't take but 1 or 2 days to realize that I had to look at the road. I had to look at the trail. It was so rocky. So when I read this passage, and it says, let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. I mean, I wish somebody had read this to me before I left. This would have been such good advice. Keep straight the path of your feet. Let all your ways be sure. Don't swerve to the right or the left. I mean, that would have been such great advice. So I picked this passage because of my Camino experience. It's interesting, though. It's Proverbs. It's Proverbs through and through. I don't know if you've ever read Proverbs before, but it kind of comes across as just kind of a, this is what you should do, and, it's teaching, it's wisdom teaching, but it has a style of mentor-child. I have wisdom. I'm going to give it to you. It's unusual in that style. It has a really unique voice in the Bible. It starts off with, hear my child, accept my words. So it's talking about this wisdom that it wants to give to the listener. So it's wisdom literature. It was a very common style of writing when it was written. Wisdom sayings were often written down and collected together. So it's kind of a unique book in our Bible. But the whole passage is about this words that the mentor wants to give to the child, to the one that needs to learn, the one that's younger. And he uses the metaphor of path. Don't go off the path. If you go off the path, that's the evil way. It's really black or white, right, for the writer. Well, we know that life is not always cut and dry. It's not always that simple. Some people might be on the right path and be absolutely unaware that they're on the right path. And some people might be off the path assuming that they're going the right way, and life will teach them. So it's not really as clearly defined as he makes it black and white. But so the core of the passage to me, every single verse is written in this style of poetry. I've mentioned this before to you, but I want to point it out because it's so clear in this passage. Every single verse is written in this double line where it'll make a statement and then it'll repeat the very same statement in a different way. It's a style of poetry, and so it goes like this. I have taught you the way of the wisdom. I have led you on the path of uprightness. So I have taught you, way of wisdom. I'm going to say it again in a different way. I've led you on the path of uprightness. When you walk, your steps will not be unhampered. If you run, you will not stumble. See, it's very, very simple. You could, in fact, read the first line of each verse and totally get the whole story because it's the style of poetry that is written in, except for one verse. And that's why you know, if you closely examine the whole chapter, that's how you know that this verse is the core. It's different. Verse 23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life." See, it's not a repeat. It's really saying, it's really doing something different in that verse because it's the core of the passage. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. So everyone I met on the Camino, not everyone made it to Santiago. We would hear as we were walking along, so-and-so had an accident and they had to go home. Not everyone made it to Santiago, but right now, on this day, today, about 2,000 people will walk into Santiago, having completed the Camino de Santiago. It just blows my mind that that is still going on and still happening. Now, I'm not saying that those people that didn't make it didn't receive blessing of completion in some way. It is that kind of place. It will give you gifts constantly. That's no different than any life lived. But there are benefits from going the whole way. A life lived of faith is the same way. If we go the whole way, a life of faith, we receive benefits that if we just check out along the way, I think I learned enough about that Christian thing, I'm going to go spend my Sundays somewhere else. There will be things that you did not receive, having not completed your whole life learning the way of Christ throughout your whole life. People check in and out of church in the same way they check in and out of the Camino de Santiago. There is nothing like walking into Santiago. There is nothing like a life fully lived following the teachings of Jesus, continually trying to learn this path that we have chosen, living eyes open to each and every moment as a spiritual moment. The passage that is most important in this is keep your heart with vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. That is our true task as people of faith, to be aware of our heart, for from it flows life. A spiritual life, is aware of one's heart and one's meaning to life, connection to God. It's hard to describe what that means, but I don't have to. We're not in Santiago yet. We're on the way. We're on our own journey to Christ, to God, to spirituality, whatever words you want to describe it. But I want to tell you today that is one of my primary goals as your pastor, is to help us be aware of the very heart of God in each and every moment. Amen. Please stand.